What is up, MMA True Believers? I am Jason Burgos from MixedMartialArts.com, and I am joined by one of the elite coaches in the world of mixed martial arts. He's the coaching head honcho at the world-renowned Extreme Couture Gym and trains a plethora of world-class fighters, including the baddest man on the planet in the UFC heavyweight champion, Francis Ngannou. That man I speak of is the one and only Eric Nicksick, Senor Nicksick. Thank you so much for the time today.
My pleasure, Jason. Thanks for having me, man. That's quite the intro.
It's well-deserved. I mean, you are a coach of champions. You are doing big things. I mean, I think it's well-deserved. No?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Fair enough. Now, you've talked in other interviews about this whole, reaction to the whole thing with this interim title fight with, everything in Francis. So I don't want to go too much into that, so to speak. So instead, I kind of want to take it in a different direction, that considering how long of a road Francis had to take to getting his second shot, waiting a long time to fight Stipe, to finally for him to accept the fight, then this whole new situation, as his coach and a dear friend, does part of you almost feel like almost UFC management has a grudge with him? And even going back to when Dana White talked about his mentality before the first Stipe fight, does it almost feel weird? Like they almost dislike this guy, which is strange because he's as good a representative for this sport as you can really get.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that, but I understand what a lot of people do, like where they're coming from with that. I think if you read between the lines, that might be the narrative that you get. But I think, to be honest with you, I think Dana really does like Francis, and I really feel like his perception of him has changed since Francis has been putting in the work and keeping his mouth shut and just doing the job the way it's supposed to be done. And there's two sides to every story, and again, I know our side and I know our camp. I don't know the UFC's at length, but again, for them to go and put on a fight in August, I think that fight makes sense. Mm-hmm. But obviously, where we all have an issue is with the interim label, and that was the one. Not even like an issue, just the more of the confusion lies with us. It's well, why would you put an interim on? Make the fight. Yeah. That's a great fight, and I think both guys are deserving in Gane and Lewis. But to put an interim label on it, I think, to be quite fair, there should be just more stipulations and guidelines to understand what constitutes a interim belt and what doesn't. Let's put some stipulations on there so it's just across the board. Somebody hasn't defended their belt for a year, an injury, that, exactly. Then by all means, and then put an interim on it. But when a guy just fought March 27th and then we agreed to fight September 25th, a month after, and then all of a sudden it's well, we're going to put the interim. And, what I'm really happy with is Francis's attitude about it. He hasn't really said anything. He's kept quiet, but more importantly, he's just been in the gym working, and that really, really, as a coach, makes me happy to see that, he's not at home pouting. He didn't take his ball and go home and cry about it. Yeah. He's just hey, it is what it is, man. We've dealt with this shit before. We're just right back to work. So that's what I'm really happy about, to be honest. You got to look at the bright side of this whole situation.
For someone that's been around the business for so long and worked with fighters on different levels, is this sort of just another one of those instances of, I guess, the ugly side of the fight game, the entertainment game, that they probably felt a need? They make this deal with Toyota Center for multiple events. I'm sure Toyota Center wants a big fight, so they kind of need a big fight in August. They have these situations where they got to interim title on it to make it bigger, instead of maybe just giving the fighters big money and not having to have some title stipulation contractual thing. Is that the lasting memory of it? It's kind of one of those weird, ugly, annoying things about the fight game that you really just have no control over because it's as much entertainment as it is sport.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it really just had to do with timing, So, Francis was back home. He wasn't able to get back to the States, and we wouldn't have really had a training camp. Not a training camp that any of us would have liked to fight a guy like Derek Lewis. And now you're talking about, on the flip side of that, you have Derek Lewis, who is the sell in Houston. Yeah. That guy needs to be on that card. Yeah. So there's no way about it. So, in my opinion, I think the whole situation would have shook out better had it gone Derek Lewis and Gane, and then have Francis and John Jones is what we all had thought we'd fight in November. Yeah. And then the winner out of those two fights would have met up and they would have fought, beginning of 2022. So just, I think the way everything kind of shook out, it was really no one's fault. It was just more of a timing thing. And, August 7th, you got to have Derek Lewis on that card, man.
Yeah.
There's no way you don't have that dude fighting in his hometown. I was there when he fought Latifi, and that place was going bananas for him, man, in Houston. So I mean, you gotta love the guy, and he's the right call. You got to make that happen.
After this fight, it seems like there's probably three paths for Francis. It's either negotiations restart up for Jon Jones, and hopefully that fight gets made. That's the fight everybody wants. I guess there's a trilogy with Stipe. That's a possibility. Or Francis has to wait for these two guys to fight and then be ready for his first title defense. If from your gut, from being around this sport for so long, if you had to say, what does your gut, knowing this business, say is probably the most likely of those three for Francis?
Probably most likely the winner out of Lewis and Gane.
Yeah.
I think just because with the contract stuff stalling with Jon Jones, and I think Stipe just needs more time to recover, and that's been historically his thing is he just takes a lot of time in between fights.
Yeah.
And then after being knocked out the way it does or was in his time in his career that he's at, I think it just makes a lot of sense for him just to be able to rest and be with his family, and he's deserved that. He's earned that. So. I think most likely scenario would be the winner out of Lewis and Gane. And now it being in August, hopefully we can get that fight before the end of the year. But my heart, what I would really like as a competitor is I like to be able to fight and compete against Jon Jones.
Yeah.
Man, I think he's the pound for pound GOAT, and I have nothing but respect for him and his team, and I think that's just really the fight that we all want as competitors, and the fans and everybody in the universe wants to see. Who doesn't want to see Jon Jones and Ngannou, right? So, so I don't know. I mean, I'm not on that side of the promotion where I have to make these negotiations and the numbers or anything like that. But when the name slides across the desk, and I just worry about the person we have to fight,
Now let's assume your gut is right, and I think that's probably what it's gonna be based on the business. But who do you think you are preparing Francis for? Hopefully, say November. Is it Gane? Is it Derek Lewis? What do you think? Who do you think's winning that?
I haven't really thought about it. I think the betting lines are a little too deep. I don't think they're respecting Derek Lewis enough, especially in a 5-round fight. You know, Derek is not an easy guy to put away. He's always there and always has the one-punch KO power. And then Gane's done a very good job of, he especially in the Jairzinho fight, I thought he did a very good job of lateral movement, but he also, in a respectable way. I wouldn't say he made the fight boring. What he did was he was smart. He fought the fight smart, but it made it a boring fight. What I liked about it is to give him credit is he's not trying to please the fans. He's trying to do what he has to do to win fights.
Yep.
And that's, I mean, we've been there before. We've had guys where it might not have been the most iconic fight or the funnest fight in the world, but at the end of the day, we're looking to get 2 paychecks and take care of our family. So, but I definitely think it's going to be a good fight. I'm interested to see how it goes, and all it really does for me is just gives me more tape and stuff to break down.
And for someone like Gane, because he's got the heavyweight power to knock people out and stuff like that, but he, especially at this weight class, he has the cardio and the technique and the skill he can win a points fight like he did against Volkov. Does that make him more of a difficult test for Francis and his kind of skill sets in that he can play keep away? He's very technical. Do you feel he's more of a bigger puzzle to solve than, say, Derek?
Yes and no. I think they both pose their problems and their issues, but they also have some of their holes. I think that we can exploit. But I think the Francis that you saw versus Stipe can beat anybody on the planet you put him in front of. Yeah. And I think we just have to execute the proper game plan. The beautiful thing about this situation with Gane and Francis is Francis knows him pretty well. Yeah. And he's been in the room with them, sparred with them. He has I wouldn't say a mental edge over him by any means, but he knows them, and that's important. So the intel that I can get from Francis in executing a game plan, I think it only really helps me.
Now let's talk about working with Miesha Tate for this comeback fight. Her jumping back into the sport successfully like she did after 5 years away, it's really impressive because I have no doubt she trained in like her own time and stuff like that throughout those years, but she still had 2 kids. She still had to go through pregnancy. She still had a family. She still was working for one championship out in Singapore. So it wasn't like she's an active fighter. She's in the gym all the time kind of thing. This sport is constantly evolving. In what ways would you say in the last 5 years, the sport has changed and is different from what she left and then what she came into successfully? Like calf kicks. Calf kicks were not a thing when she left. They are a big thing now. Like, what ways has the sport changed just in 5 years?
Yeah, I think, calf kicks for me personally have been around for a while because Benson Henderson, I remember watching
Yeah.
Benson doing those years ago. But you're right. They kind of catch on like wildfire
Yeah.
once, it's like it's kind of like that, like that zombie apocalypse. Like you get two or three people and all of a sudden
Yeah.
everybody's got it, right?
Yep.
But, for me, especially, I think guys are more fluid. Fighters are more fluid out of both stances. They're able to strike out of both stances. Traditional old school people, I think, are still kind of resistant to learning that and teaching that because it is difficult. It is hard. Yeah. And that's the biggest thing for me and my growth with a lot of my fighters and being a Dwayne Ludwig guy. I think just the fluidity between in and out of stances or both stances, it allows you to set a lot of traps, but it also allows you to dictate, the way the cage control goes, the geography in the cage, things we like to do as far as our setups. That part is very important. And, there's nothing I think we would ever show Miesha that might, make her switch stances or anything like that. So, but again, like she's been involved in the sport, so her mental capacity hasn't changed.
Okay. She's
been an analyst. She's been working with ONE FC. So that would have worried me a lot, being gone for 5 years and coming back and all of a sudden, here I am, let's fight again. So, but her being still involved in the sport and still training gave me a lot of optimism. So when she did get back, I don't think the learning curve took her very long. And you saw the product last Saturday.
Yeah. In an interview you did with the MMA Fighting recently, before that fight, you mentioned not being surprised when she did retire because you worked with her for that last, fight and stuff like that, and she, like, her mentality just didn't seem good, in a good space. Explain, like, what her demeanor was like that didn't seem good compared to what she was like when she came back, and how do you deal with that as a coach when you kind of see your fighter just is going through the motions, not really into it?
Yeah, man. The best analogy I can give you is like it just felt like a dark cloud was hanging over her. She didn't want to be there. Her body language, her attitude. We hit pads. I think it was the week before she left, and I wasn't cornering her, but I was always around to help, so I was always doing some stuff with her one way or another. But so I held pads for her the week before she left, and I remember them just, that it just being like heavy. It was like, she didn't want to be there. Yeah. She wasn't happy with her life and where she was at. And we got done, and I remember sitting there and we were talking, and she was almost in tears.
Wow.
And it was like, she never told me she was going to retire, but when she did, it didn't surprise me. But I remember in the conversation that we had, I just said, I hope one day that you find the love again for this sport, because I know right now it's just wearing heavy on you. And she said the same. She's like, yeah, me too. I really hope so. So, in a lot of ways, and I'm making my own dejections from this, but I feel like by her retiring was her able to kind of like clear the slate and start fresh, separate herself from all the negativity in her life, and then hit the reset button and then come back. So she kind of has that Phoenix rising mentality. And that's the biggest thing I noticed too, Jason, is just, bro, like, she's just in a happy place, man. She's in such a good, her aura, her psyche, her body language, everything about her, man. She's just so happy. And that's what really made me, as a friend, coaching aside, just from the human element, that's what made me so proud and so happy to see was being able to sit in the cage with her before Raquel Pennington and then seeing her get her hand raised last Saturday.
And I mean, and as a coach for so long, I'm sure you have a deep knowledge of like the physical mechanics of the body and body movement and how people look and stuff like that. For because she did have that gap, but she left at 29 years old, which is freaking nuts. And she had done so much. She still had miles on her body. Was coming back at 35, getting into the rigorous training and stuff like that. Body mechanics wise, was she just not like an average 35-year-old, or was she was a very good in shape person, but her mentality was different. So how she conducted her training and rest and recovery, that was the difference to make her come in and still be so good despite all the time away.
Yeah, I think all of the above, and for me, and I'm a father of 3 kids, but I'm also a Neanderthal, and I don't really understand a lot of like what women go through during their pregnancies.
Yeah.
So she had to literally sit me down in my office and explain to me, like, okay, my pelvis is twisted. I have this abdominal tearing. I have this in my hip. I have this going on. So I'm not trying to be a wuss. I'm just trying to explain to you,
Yeah.
my coach,
Yeah.
on some of the limitations that I have. So which is important, is that communication.
Yeah.
Had I not known those things, we just would have done whatever we thought. But we had to be creative in her training process. We had to communicate with all the coaches on board, so we all knew. We had to communicate with her strength and conditioning, so we all knew what we were trying to accomplish. I really wasn't too nervous about her sparring like twice a week or anything like that, but I felt she did need to get some sparring in.
Yeah.
And then we modified some of the sparring to be like more technical sparring or you know, just drill sparring, things like that, to make sure she's getting her timing right. So we just really had to modify things to fit her correctly, and then the days we could push hard, we did. So I was actually just really happy with the communication that we all had with one another throughout the camp, and I thought those, you know, the results spoke for themselves during her fight.
Yeah.